I wanted to talk to you today about entrepreneurship and about startups and about what I'm doing with a firm called Obvious Ventures. But I thought I would tell you that story in the context of TED, because TED has really shaped not just my personal life, but also my professional life, my career. And to tell you my TED story, I want to start with a pre-TED story that I've never told publicly before. It goes back to the year 2003. Zem, who you just met, was actually 8 months pregnant with our daughter, our second child. And I got invited to a very, very, for me, exciting, very, very nerdy trip to Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama, which is home to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. We're lucky to have an actual NASA spacesuit with us today. But if any of you are students of space history, you know that after World War II, the United States recruited the top German rocket scientist, Wernher von Braun, and decided they needed to sequester him somewhere in the United States that the Russians wouldn't look to find him. So they picked Huntsville, Alabama, and that, to this day, is a big part of the U.S. space program. It's where mission control is for the International Space Center. It's where a lot of the engine propulsion testing happened through the whole Apollo program. And NASA runs a summer camp for kids there called Space Camp, and they created a grown-up nerd version for a bunch of internet entrepreneurs, and I was lucky enough to be included. You see me here in the front row of this photo next to Sergey Brin. And the trip was put together by Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, and this woman in the top right, Megan Smith. Megan is an old dear friend of mine. We worked at Apple together, and she is now the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. She was not in that role yet back in 2003, but she was just about to join Google. Google had not gone public yet, and she and Pierre put this group together. And our group included a young rocket engineer named Elon Musk, who was just in the process of starting a company called SpaceX. So this is a really incredible time where we're basically training on space shuttle simulators. And we're talking about two things on this trip. One was there was a lot of buzz. About half the group had just been to the TED conference in Monterey, and they were talking about how Chris Anderson had really reignited TED, and the content was so amazing, and there were all these amazing new reveals of new technologies, and it's what inspired me to, say to Zem, hey, we're going next year, and that's really when we started signing up and attending. The other thing we were talking about on this trip was about the end of the space shuttle program. NASA was basically showing us some PowerPoint renderings of what might replace the space shuttle for American, human space exploration. How are we going to get astronauts to and from ISS? Ultimately, how could we go back to the moon or colonize Mars? And they literally were just renderings. There was no real plan or program. The U.S. space program was shrinking at this time. And Elon leaned over to us during the presentation and he said, well, I'm actually going to build what takes, Americans to the ISS and ultimately to Mars. And it was right at the beginning of the Falcon 1 project, the first of SpaceX now many launch vehicles. I think they're up to Falcon 9 Heavy. So it was a really cool moment that I just wanted to share with you, where it was the beginning of seeing an amazing American entrepreneur who's also really been inspired by TED start a new business and take on what people thought was an absolutely insane, crazy idea to build a rocket company and roll the clock forward. That company, I think, is now considered a great business success, but also a really important piece of U.S. technology in terms of our space program. And it's a great example of what you guys do as entrepreneurs, which is to go try to solve some big problem that 90% of the world would think you're crazy to take on. I think those are the best companies, those are the best solutions that come out of that process. So let's roll the clock forward 2 years and tell you one more TED story. And since today is a family affair with Zem and I thought I would bring our oldest child, Dylan, into the picture, literally. And this is another of what I call and what the TED conference calls TED moments, where amazing connections happen. And in this case, we were in Monterey, California, And we were in the hallway of the main hotel that at the time everybody stayed at. TED was really small. Back then it was 500 people. And we got introduced to this guy with the big fuzzy mustache, Professor Robert Full, who leads the biomotion department at the University of Berkeley. He and his postdocs were the ones that figured out how geckos can walk on glass. And he had given, I think, 2 years prior, a TED Talk on exactly that. And he was back speaking at TED in 2005 to talk about his work studying arthropods, in particular cockroaches, and how cockroaches have amazing fully articulated leg joints that allow them to walk over really tricky variegated surfaces. And he was using that research to then apply biomimicry to spin out interesting patents and new products and new innovations. And it just so happens that our son, since birth, kind of came out as Charles Darwin Jr., as we like to call him, and has declared that he wants to be an entomologist, herpetologist, marine biologist, and microbiologist. I think he's a future TEDster. But at a very young age, he knew an enormous amount about insects and entomology, and he still does. He's 14 now, but he's 4 years old in these photos, and he met Professor Full in the hallway, and they started talking about insects, and Bob said, "Wow, you know more than some of my undergrads. How would you like to come on stage and be my assistant, because I'm going to be talking about Madagascar hissing cockroaches?" And Chris Anderson, the curator of TED, told me that he was uncomfortable holding those hissing cockroaches, and so he asked Dylan to be his assistant and demonstrate and describe what the legs feel like of these cockroaches. So it was definitely a proud TED moment for Zem and I to have our little guy on stage. And that leads me to jump forward to what I wanted to talk to you guys about today, which is a new venture fund that I had the privilege of co-founding 2 years ago called Obvious Ventures. This is some of the founding team. To my right in the photo is a guy named Evan Williams that probably needs no introduction. He was the co-founder of Blogger back in the days when Zem was blogging EcoFabulous. Then the co-founder of something called Twitter that you guys are probably familiar with, and he's now the co-founder and CEO of an amazing publishing network called Medium. That's actually one of our investments in the Obvious Ventures portfolio. Our third co-founder, Vishal Vasish, spent 11 years building an outdoor apparel company called Patagonia with Yvon Chouinard, the founder. He was the chief strategy officer at Patagonia, and helped build what I think of as one of the exemplary company cultures in the United States in terms of how you build a company around principles, around values, around integrating sustainability goals with your product and with your brand promise to your customers. And what we were trying to do with Obvious, we started with a crazy idea, again, back to, I think, how all great ventures start. We had a combination of inspiration and frustration. Our inspiration came from companies that we had various hands in building, including but not limited to Twitter, where the startup made a product or service that inherently had some environmental or social benefit. So every dollar of revenue that that company made was also helping solve some systemic challenge, helping make the world better in some way. And I know that's often a cliche in Silicon Valley, but we tried to look at it in a more analytical way and say whether it's an organic baby food company I helped build called Plum Organics, or Twitter helping give hundreds of millions of people a voice and helping to actually change governments and change corporate governance and corporate behavior. Or a company that is building renewable energy to help solve climate change and get us off fossil fuels. Our inspiration was, hey, those are the kinds of companies we want to help build, and we want to put our time and our money to work doing that. And at the time, there was a category, and there still is a category of investment called social impact investing, which is a really important effort that's somewhere between philanthropy and venture capital. But for us, our frustration was mainstream venture capital, centered here in Silicon Valley, tended to be disinterested in companies that were trying to solve these big problems like climate change, like chronic disease, like student outcomes and education. And when entrepreneurs would pitch those traditional venture capitalists, not all of them, but I think a good majority of them would say, well, if you're doing something really good, you must be compromising my profits. So why should I invest in that when I can invest in this new dating app or this new, car parking valet service that is, we think is going to maximize our profits? And we said, well, we think they got it wrong. We have a contrarian idea that the best financial returns, the most important and then the most scalable businesses are going to come from one solving big problems. So we coined a term to describe that. We call it world positive investing. And we, of course, put a hashtag in front of it to be good Twitter citizens. And we encourage other investors, other entrepreneurs, universities to try to use this same term. We don't want to own it. We want to open source it. But we think it's a new category of capital. And for me, it's how I would describe my TED dream, which is something you guys are all going to have a chance to do in the great Nasdaq recording studio here. My TED dream is how do we reinvent venture capital to be a change agent, an agent for good, for solving the biggest and hardest problems that humanity faces. And so we've been at this for 2 years. We set out to raise our first fund. We were targeting $100 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually small in venture capital terms. And we were fortunate to have a little more interest than that. And when we got into the $120 million range, we decided to have a little fun with our first fund, and we closed the fund at exactly $123,456,789. And when we filed that with the SEC, lots of press tend to watch those filings. And so the next morning, I got to be on CNBC Squawk Box talking about this 1-9 sequential math joke that we put into our fund. So we try to not take ourselves too seriously as part of the Obvious brand. You can tell by the very subtle branding of Obvious Ventures. But we've been at this for 2 years, and we've made 28 investments so far. We've done it across 3 investment themes. And I wanted to just talk to you about those themes and tell you a couple of quick stories about some of the companies in there. So our first theme we call sustainable systems, and that's really about energy and resources. When we look at some of the biggest economic categories on the planet, they're about resources. Resources like energy, which today is predominantly produced through fossil fuels. We want to reimagine all those categories to take them from dirty to clean, from scarce to abundant. And we have a few ideas, and we have some images on our website on obvious.com. And these are some of those images where we say things like, in the near future, our buildings will generate more energy than they consume. And we think that's a simple but powerful idea. Why isn't each building, whether it's a residential home or an office building like the one we're in, why isn't it a power plant that's making distributed energy, that's providing energy not just for the building itself, but it could share that energy with the buildings around it? And that's led for us to a whole investment thesis around changing the electric grid as it works in the US and in many other countries, which today is a one-way grid. Electrons are generated centrally, and then they're pushed downhill like water flowing downhill. Well, we want to reimagine that as a two-way grid that supports this idea of distributed energy through solar and wind. That energy can be made locally. It can be either pushed into the grid, consumed locally, or stored in local battery storage. And all of the technologies to do that all exist today. And so we've made 3 investments in this area. We've invested in a company called Enbala, stands for Energy Imbalance, and it runs that complicated software to help energy utilities change the way the grid works and to support two-way energy flows and energy storage. And we've invested in a couple of solar companies. One is still stealth. The other one is called Citon, and they're building what I call Salesforce and Oracle financials for the solar industry. Turns out all these companies that hopefully you've heard of, like SolarCity, Sungevity, Sunrun, that are helping Americans put solar on their roof in a way that's really cost-effective for the average American. Those companies run their businesses on a set of Excel spreadsheets. They're so complex to keep track of all these assets, all of the loans from banks that are tied to these complicated energy production schedules and renewable energy credits. This company is actually automating that in a set of beautiful cloud software that's custom built for the solar industry. So we're really excited about that and some of the other things we're doing in renewable energy. Within sustainable systems, I mentioned we also care about resources. I'm going to predict that all of you have either an iPhone or an Android phone with you today. We all have a smartphone that's transformed our life and our work, but there's a dark side to that, and I just use this as an example, that each one of your phones contains a whole bunch of rare earth elements that were probably sourced across 6 continents, that were probably transported on ships using bunker fuel to Shenzhen, China, to be manufactured and then shipped back here to the States for you. So that's one example of a whole bunch of categories where we see resources made in an unsustainable way, and we want to change that. Tofu's really upset about this. Yeah, he really wants to change this. He wants us to be more sustainable. So you might be able to guess the one I'm going to talk about, and this is an investment that was one of the first investments we made in the fund. The company has been stealth for 3 years. They just announced in November of 2015. So I can talk about a company called Diamond Foundry that's reimagining where diamonds come from. Today, diamonds are mined. Diamond mining is really, really horrific, both in its environmental damage, but even worse, the social damage, the slavery and death that is occurring around the diamond mining industry is really horrific. But at the same time, diamond is a miracle material. It has the best heat conductivity of any element on the periodic table. The U.S. military actually uses diamonds in nose cones of supersonic missiles to move the heat off the nose cone. If we could make diamonds big enough to make semiconductors, it would be an order of magnitude better than silicon. So it's a miracle material, and we backed a company that has figured out how to grow diamonds in a plasma reactor. So they actually take renewable energy and methane, and over a period of weeks, they grow nearly flawless diamonds. And they're selling those diamonds now initially for the gem and jewelry market. They're up to 2 carats in size, and you're going to see those sizes just increase over time as their technology gets better. So we think it's a perfect example of a world-positive business. There's no question that this company is going to be a great financial success based on the huge value of diamonds, but they're also, with every dollar that they make, offsetting a really dirty and unsustainable business for that resource. Next theme I want to talk about is what we call healthy living, and this should be very familiar to you guys. The fact that you chose to come here today and watch this TED Livestream means you're probably already on mile 25 of this marathon, of understanding that food for humans is intimately linked to both your health and also the health of our planet. And so we're looking at reimagining how we grow food and how we use food as medicine and how we change the whole stack of medicine and pharma and healthcare. And we're not biotech investors, but we are looking all the way from nutrition and wellness to health IT and using technology and those smartphones in your pocket to help improve human health and help shift healthcare from treatment to prevention. On our homepage, we use the phrase, in the near future, our food will promote health, not disease. And again, we think that's a powerful one-liner to talk about some of the problems with processed food, with the addition of sugar and salt in everything that we eat to maximize profits for big food companies, but to not maximize health outcomes for humans. And we want to flip that. A couple of things we're doing in this area. We have 3 investments in plant-based food companies. One is called Beyond Meat. You can find it at Whole Foods, and I think they're starting to expand into mainstream grocery like Safeway and Kroger. And they're using pea protein to reimagine and recreate what we think of as center-of-plate protein that we feed to our families. So they have kind of a grilled chicken fajita product that's 100% plant-based. They have a burger called the Beast Burger that's a 1/3 of a pound burger that grills and sweats and pops on your grill. 100% plant-based, no animal products, but they are designed to mimic the the sound and taste and flavor and mouthfeel of meat. So that beyond the enlightened folks that are vegans, we want to actually make products that mainstream consumers that know and love animal products can enjoy. But we think as the world population grows to 9 billion and beyond, there's no way there's not enough rainforest to clear cut to grow soybeans to feed to cows and pigs to feed that many humans. So we have to shift our food systems. And so again, we're betting with our wallets and betting on plant-based foods with Beyond Meat. We're also investors in a company called Miyoko's Creamery. They make a vegan cheese. The founder, Miyoko Shinner, is a famous vegan chef, and she figured out how to take the bacterial microbes that today in bovine milk culture the milk and make cheese, and she got them to grow and flourish in organic cashew milk. And so she's creating these aged cheeses. She also has a toastable, meltable mozzarella that browns. That's really incredible. 100% organic, 100% plant-based. Lastly, we're investors in a business called Urban Remedy that you may know in the Bay Area. They just opened a location in the Ferry Building. They have a location on Union Street, 2 locations in Marin. And they have their own manufacturing plant in Richmond, California, where they're helping to create jobs in a low socioeconomic area. And that plant is doing cold-pressed juices and other plant-based meals and snacks that, again, are trying to deliver this idea that you are what you eat, that food is medicine. And as consumers get more and more educated and shift their dietary preferences, Urban Remedy wants to be that fast, convenient grab-and-go place where you can go get a quick meal, but you can know that it's also all organic and healthy for you. The third theme that we're focused on at Obvious Ventures is what we call people power. And it's a little bit ambiguous by design. For us, people power is about a digital democratization that's happening, driven by those smartphones I mentioned, driven by just a huge downward push in the access to technology by billions of people on the planet. And we think that sources of power are shifting from these kind of centralized, closed sources to these democratized, open, from the few to the many. In this category, we're investors in a business called Change.org that many of you may know. They're the leader in online petitions. They've got over 100 million people signed up for this service, and people are self-organizing around causes, and they're getting corporations to change, local governments, state governments, even affecting federal government in terms of people being able to form these kind of crowds of wisdom to move the needle on change. We think that's incredible. That company's also very, very profitable, so it's a great example of our world positive thesis that you can make profit and purpose. You don't have to have an or between those words. You can have an and. For us, people power is also about student outcomes in education and reimagining education. This image is actually created by one of our investments, a company called Magic Leap, that you may have read about in the press. They hold the record of raising, I think, the largest amount of money for a private company. They just raised they had a $500 million Series B, and they just raised a $750 million Series C. The company is still very secret, so I can't tell you too much about it, but I can tell you what's been reported publicly, which is they're reverse engineering how the human eye works and the retina and the optic nerve, and have the ability to create light fields, which is how we see everything in the room today, but they have the ability to generate light fields and project them on your retina, to mix in virtual objects with the physical material objects that you see. And you can imagine that changes a whole range of industries, everything from entertainment and gaming to education and business productivity. So we're really excited about that. So those are a few examples of what we're up to, and hopefully you get a sense of why Ev and I and Vishal founded Obvious Ventures. We'd love to talk to any of you guys as entrepreneurs. If you're working on a world positive startup that's trying to solve a big problem, we'd love to learn more. And I'll end with the anecdote that really the origin story for Obvious Ventures also goes back to TED, because in 2004, that same amazing woman I mentioned, Megan Smith, now our CTO, was a VP at Google, and Google had just acquired Blogger, And she introduced me to Evan Williams in Monterey at TED. So that's where we first met and where we first started dreaming about this idea that we're trying to make a reality. So thank you for your time.